The only time in the entire Bible it talks about God doing something with all his heart and all his soul, it's in reference to God planting the people back in their land, in the land of Israel. Well, that means God's a Zionist.
למען ציון לא אחשה, ולמען ירושלים לא אשקוט.
You are listening to Hebrew Voices with Nehemia Gordon. Thank you for supporting Nehemia's Makor Hebrew Foundation. Learn more at nehemiaswall.com.
I want to welcome you to our Tuesday night marathon. We're going to crank it up tonight, and we got a real special guest, Nehemia Gordon. Nehemia, welcome to the show tonight.
Hey, Shalom. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Nehemia, would you like to open us up in prayer tonight?
Sure. Father, Yehovah, Avinu Shebashamayim, Father in heaven, Yehovah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to come here and share with people. Thank you for bringing the embassy of the most powerful country in the world to your eternal city, Yehovah. This does honor to you and to your people and to all those who love your name. Amen.
I say amen to that. Again, everybody, welcome tonight. I'm really excited to have Nehemia here. It's the first time we've had him on the show. I'm really excited about the announcement that America has moved the embassy to Jerusalem. What's your thoughts on that?
It is of prophetic proportions what is happening. I mean, this is the type of thing that we read about in the Bible. You know, I mean, there's a similar account in the Bible where it talks about they looked in the archives and they found this letter, and the letter there is in the book of Ezra. They found it in the Persian archives of Cyrus's decree allowing the Jews to return to Jerusalem. This is of similar proportion. The world's undisputed sole superpower has, not just in speech, but in practice, put their capital in Jerusalem. You know, I was talking to a member of the Israeli government, Michael Oren, and he made the remark, and I have a podcast about this. I don't remember if this was the part we included in the podcast. It might have been one of the offhand remarks before we started recording. But you can go to my website, nehemiaswall.com, and look for Michael Oren. He's a deputy minister in the government of Israel. And I made the remark about how important this was, the declaration Trump had made last year. And he said, well, it'd be far more important if he actually does it. And I think I said some kind of offhand remark, well, he's not going to actually do it. We don't expect that. But at least he's made the declaration. And Oren's point was, no, he's got to do it for it to be important. And I didn't believe he was going to actually do it. And he did. I mean, you've got to give credit to President Trump for following through on something that I don't know that anybody believed he was going to actually do it. And now it is what we call an accomplished fact.
I praise God for that because, you know, we need some blessings for a change in America. You know, Genesis 12:3, if you bless my people, I'll bless you. You curse them, I'll curse you. And we have done the wrong thing by Israel for too long, especially as Obama was leaving, you know. Boy, he threw Israel under the bus. I didn't like that guy from the beginning, but I'm going to tell you, I'm really proud of what President Trump, I'll just call him POTUS for short, did. He's a man of his word, and, you know, God will bless those that stand with Israel. And so I applaud what he did. Let me talk about that for a minute. Jerusalem, the eternal capital of Israel. Many people are trying to destroy Israel. They want to take the land back. They want to divide the land. And for this reason, I came out recently and said, God is a Zionist, and so am I. And you're the guy to ask about the definition of Zionism. My stance, Nehemia, is that Israel and the Jewish people have a right to every bit of the land that God promised Abraham and Isaac, the child of promise. Land that even today they don't have full possession of, because some of the land that was promised, doesn't it extend over into modern-day Saudi Arabia, even modern-day Egypt?
Let's talk about the parts that are indisputable, which is the eastern bank of the Jordan River, which is currently under Hashemite occupation. And, you know, it's a country, an artificial country created by European colonial powers called the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. And that was from land they stole from the Jewish people. You know, and it's funny because it's almost like they call bitter sweet and sweet bitter, like Isaiah spoke about. because they call Israel a colonial entity, a colonial European power, but it's actually the exact opposite. The Jews are the indigenous population of the land of Israel, and European powers came and created these artificial entities in the Middle East to steal land from the Jews. And in 1920, I believe it was 1926, that they stole the eastern bank of the Jordan River. They stole from us parts of, our land goes all the way to the Euphrates River.
Yes.
And, they took that from us unjustifiably. And one day the creator of the universe will restore it to us. We can only pray for that day.
That's
but
right.
Now they want to steal more of our land and drive us into the sea. Now, you said God is a Zionist. I want to define Zionist. It's really important. The term Zionist is actually, people say it's a term from the 19th century. I actually found it in the name of a rabbi from the 14th century, Menachem HaTzioni, Menachem the Zionist. And what it meant then is what it means today. The belief that the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people and that we have a right to return there. And why is it called Zionism? Because Zion is another name for Jerusalem, specifically the Temple Mount.
Thank you.
When I say, that's just a fact. When I say
Yes.
God is a Zionist, what does that mean? Jeremiah 32, verse 41. Let me read it to you. I'll read it to you first in the King James. Let me open that up real quick, or
Awesome.
some English translation here.
Brother, this is the program I've wanted to do for a long time because I needed someone to back up my belief that what I thought was true. And I'm hearing what I wanted to hear, the truth, that I'm not a strange oddball to say God is a Zionist and so am I.
Oh, absolutely. He's explicitly a Zionist. And before I give you this verse, in the entire Bible, we repeatedly hear about how we're supposed to do things with all our heart and all our soul. It says in the Shema Yisrael, Yehovah Eloheinu, Yehovah Echad. Hear, O Israel, Yehovah is our God, Yehovah is one. V'ahavta et Yehovah Elohecha, and you shall love Yehovah your God, b'chol levavcha, u'b'chol nafshecha, b'chol meodecha, with all your heart and all your soul and all your might. And when they asked Yeshua, what's the most important commandment? In the version in Mark, he actually quotes the Shema. And I think in all the gospel, all three of the synoptic gospels, he quotes that verse, I believe, where it's love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul. In the entire Bible, there's only one time it speaks about God doing something with all his heart and all his soul. And that's in Jeremiah 32, verse 41. It says, yea, I will rejoice over them to do them good, and I will plant them in this land assuredly with my whole heart and with my whole soul. In Hebrew, it's the same phrase, b'chol libi u'b'chol nafshi, with all my heart and all my soul. The only time in the entire Bible it talks about God doing something with all his heart and all his soul, it's in reference to God planting the people back in their land, in the land of Israel. Well, that means God's a Zionist. The creator of the universe is a Zionist. There's a famous passage in the 12th century Bible commentator Rashi. Rashi was this brilliant rabbi in southern France. And some of the things he says are kind of hokey, but sometimes he has these brilliant insights. And he asks the question, he says, why does the Bible begin with Genesis 1? And he approaches the Torah specifically as this legal book. He says, why do we have a bunch of stories at the beginning of a legal book? The first verse in the Bible should have been Exodus 12:2. This month shall be for you the beginning of months, because that's the first commandment that Israel was given as a people in Exodus 12:2. There's a famous passage. It's the opening passage of Rashi in Genesis 1:1. So why does that God open the story with Genesis 1:1, with the creation of the world, and not with Exodus 12:2, Rashi explains? Because the nations of the world one day would come to the Jews and say, you've stolen someone else's land. You have no right. You claim that land because you say your God gives it to you. Well, it's not your land. It's stolen land from some other people. Now, Rashi said this in the 12th century before there was such a thing as a Palestinian. And so therefore, why does it begin in Genesis 1:1? Because Genesis 1:1 tells you God is the one who created the land, and he has the right to give it to whomever he pleases. And that is the significance of the creation of the earth in Genesis, to tell the world the land of Israel was created by God along with all land, and he can give it to the people of Israel. He can take it away from the Canaanites, and he can put the people of Israel there. He certainly can take it away from the foreign invaders, the Arabs who came from Arabia, and from Egypt and from Syria and have no business in our land.
That's right.
They're welcome like any migrants, but once they make claim to be the indigenous population and steal our identity and our rights,
yes,
then we've got a whole different problem. So this is in a way hard coded into the Bible itself. God is the one who created the land of Israel. He's the one who gave it to the people of Israel, and it's his desire, his rejoicing, he says, I will rejoice over them to do them good, and I will plant them in this land assuredly. It says in Hebrew, be'emet, in truth, b'chol libi u'b'chol nafshi, with all my heart and all my soul. And it's the only time we're ever told that God's going to do something with all his heart and all his soul. That is to act as a Zionist and return the people of Israel to Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel.
Nehemia, if someone would only count how many times Zion is written in the Word of God, they would be amazed. And folks, again, God is a Zionist, and so am I. So is Nehemia, and so is anyone who loves Israel and will stand on the Word of God, which declares that God gave this land to Abraham and Isaac, the child of promise, and God keeps his word. And he's bringing the people back to the land, and he is eventually going to restore all the land that he promised them. That people today, governments around the world, are trying to take away from the Jewish people. It made me so angry when Bush put pressure on, what was his name? I'm sorry, the Prime Minister of Israel, to give up Gaza.
You're talking about Ariel Sharon.
Excuse me, Sharon. Yeah. Forgive me, Sharon. And Gaza even belonged to the Jewish people. And look at what it's become today.
Not only did it belong to the Jewish people, if you go back 500 years ago, the Jews had what they called the 4 holy cities. And the 4 holy cities were centers of Jewish learning. These centers of Jewish learning were Gaza, Hebron, Jerusalem, and Sfat or Safed. So Gaza was considered one of the 4 holy. If you came to Israel as a Jewish pilgrim 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, you had to visit one of these 4 cities, and hopefully all 4, because these were the centers of Jewish learning in the land of Israel. So, it's incredible that we've gone now from, from it being the Holy Land, for being a holy city, to now it's actually foreign occupied territory.
And if the United Nations had their way, they want to take all the land back away from Israel.
Oh, they want to drive the Jews into the sea and
yes,
and send send us back to the lands of our exile. Theodor Herzl is considered the founder of modern Zionism, which is a bit of a misconception, but I want to give him credit. He was more of a political leader. There were Jews who had already returned and wanted to return to the land of Israel before Theodor Herzl. My ancestors were among those people. I found out that my great-grandmother's father was a rabbi in Eastern Europe in a little town in Lithuania called Tavrig. His name was Baruch Nassanel Nevedel. And in the late 1800s, he led this in his little village, and this was happening all over Europe. He led a rally for Zionism, for returning, and they called it Chovevei Zion, the lovers of Zion. In a sense, they were proto-Zionists, before the term Zionism existed, or before it existed in the way it later came to mean what it meant under Herzl. Let's put it that way, because it existed for centuries before that. So he was a Chovev Zion, a lover of Zion, and so his daughter and his son-in-law, who I'm named after, Nehemia Robinson, their dream was to move to the land of Israel. When they fled Eastern Europe in 1923, they wanted to go to Israel, but they couldn't get there because the British had slapped something called the White Paper on the Jewish people, which limited the number of Jews who were allowed to come. And as a result, he ended up, instead of fleeing from Eastern Europe to Israel, he went to Chicago, where I was born.
Wow.
Now, for my great-grandfather, it was a dream. It wasn't just a dream, it was a legend. I mean, it literally was the stuff of legends, that the Jews would return to the land of Israel and have a sovereign state. It literally was the stuff of legends. What Theodor Herzl is most famous for is the saying. He said, Im tirtzu en zo agada, which is usually translated, if you will it, it is no dream. But that's not what it means. It literally means if you will it, it is not a legend. Because in the minds of the people in the 19th century, when he said this, it was just a legend. Jews in their own land, independent. No, that's like, like it really was the type of thing. It would be like saying, knights in armor and jousting. It's like the stuff of legend, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Jews had a sovereign state 2,300 years ago, right? Under the Maccabees. That was the last time, or under Bar Kokhba, 1,900 years ago for 3.5 years, right? But to have, again, a sovereign Jewish state, no, that's the stuff of legends. Let's be mature here and get back to business. And Theodor Herzl came along and he excited people. And he told them, if you will it, if you just will it, if you want it enough and you act on it and you carry out your desire, if you put your money where your mouth is and your actions where your heart is, then it won't be a legend. And because of that determination, now I can do what my great-grandfather was not able to do. I get choked up about this. I have an Israeli passport that my great-grandfather, that was a fantasy to him to have an Israeli passport. To have the ability to live in the land of Israel was something that literally was the stuff of fantasies of generations of my ancestors, and now it's a fact of life.
Brother,
and
I'm so excited.
That is a miracle of biblical proportion.
Folks, it's an exciting day to be alive. Zionism is not a bad word, but people make it out to be. The reason I'm highlighting this tonight is enough is enough. I'm tired of people using the word Zionism to describe what they believe is a Jewish world government conspiracy, New World Order. I hear every time someone uses the word Zion, I say this is a red flag for showing their true colors. These people are anti-Semitic. Many of them have the spirit of Adolf Hitler.
Anti-Semitic propaganda.
Yes.
Jews don't control the world. Jews don't control the banks in the world. It's true that there's a lot of very prominent Jewish bankers and prominent Jewish people in finance and things like that. And there's a reason for that. What's the reason for that? When I was growing up, there was this emphasis on studying and learning. And every one of my sisters, we were 5 people in our family, 4 sisters and me, and every one of us went to a university. 2 of them are professors in universities, and but everybody has a college degree. And so Jews have this emphasis on learning. My father, his brother, and he grew up in the 40s and 50s. And my grandmother said to them, they said, "You can be anything you want in life, sons, a doctor or a lawyer." Those were literally those were the only 2 options. And so my father was a rabbi, but rabbi wasn't a profession that his parents recognized. Lawyer was a profession to earn your family a living. Rabbi was something he did out of love in his spare time. But the profession was lawyer. And so you have generations of Jews who have been told, accountant, that's a good profession. Professor, that's a good profession. Basketball player, not so much, right? We could have right now the most skilled basketball player on planet Earth, in the Bronx, in the Jewish community in Borough Park somewhere, and we would never know it because that's not it's not perceived by most Jews as a valid profession to go into. So there isn't an emphasis on that. Whereas there is an emphasis on studies and academics and finance. There's a long history of Jews in finance, and there's a reason for that. 200 years ago, most people on planet Earth were farmers. Something like 98% of people alive 200 years ago were farmers. And certainly 300 years before the Industrial Revolution, let's put it that way. 98% of the people in the world were farmers. And you had a very small number of people who did anything but farming. And Jews were not allowed to farm. It was illegal for Jews to farm. It was considered a holy profession, farming. And Jews were considered unclean and therefore, hated by the Christian governments whose rule they lived under. And so Jews weren't allowed to farm. They were allowed to be engaged in banking. They were allowed to be engaged in accounting. They were allowed to be engaged in certain professions. And so they naturally did those things. And so we have a long tradition of doing those things, but we don't control the world. If there's this Jewish banking that controls all the world, I want my piece of that. Where's my portion of the international Jewish banking conspiracy? Give me a break.
Let me tell you what
people will say, well, Jews are smart. There's a lot of smart Jews and there's a lot of really dumb Jews. go to Jerusalem and I can introduce you to some of my neighbors. And some of them, by the way, are very smart. But some of them are some of the dumbest people you'll ever meet in the world. And, there's smart and dumb people in every community. The Jews have an emphasis on certain fields and certain types of professions. And as a result, we tend to excel in that, So, I think other I heard it said that the next, Nobel Prize winner is planting rice in a field in India because he never had the opportunity to learn physics, and that very well may be true. So Jews had those opportunities, which is a blessing. And it's a blessing that I think a lot of Jews acknowledge and recognize. And I think it's one of the reasons that you have a lot of Jews who want to share that opportunity with other people. It's the reason that Jews were involved in civil rights, because we realized, wow, this isn't anything. I mean, look, we worked hard to maximize and make the most of our blessing, but the blessing was given to us as a free gift.
Yes. The
fact that we had a parent that pushed us to go to university instead of a parent who pushed us to go on the street corner and sell drugs.
True.
That's a gift that I acknowledge, and that I think a lot of Jews acknowledge, and that's a reason that Jews were involved in trying to give these opportunities to other communities as well, and still are. But it also goes with a lot of hard work.
Absolutely, folks. Again, God says, if you bless my people, I'll bless you. If you curse them, I'll curse you. The lines are being drawn. Whose side are you going to be on? Many of the people that are using Zion as a dirty word, or they want to get over there and divide up the land, I would say it would be these same people that if we were in the days of King David and the armies of Israel were having to defend themselves and go out there and fight against those that would conquer them, go up against the Philistines, for example, those same people that are attacking Israel today, they would be over there on the side of Goliath fighting on the Philistine side. You can call yourself whatever you want to call yourself. But the fact is, if you do not bless Israel and embrace the right of the Jewish people to all the land that God gave Abraham and Isaac, the child of promise, you're against the Lord God. You're going against what he's commanded to be. We have no right, no one, to negate what God has said is going to take place. God means what he says. He says, I'm the same yesterday, today, and forever. I change not. Now, you can bless Israel or you can curse them. The choice is yours. I choose to bless the people of God and bless Israel. And you know what? If people don't like it, they can go lump it. But when you go over there and see Israel, and I've been over there twice, I'd like to go back again. It's a very small country, folks. It's surrounded by enemies on all sides. And people say, well, what about the Palestinians? What about the Palestinians? Okay, that's not their land. And if they live there peacefully and they don't blow people up, then, Israel's okay. But that's not what they're over there to do. They're over there to take away the land.
We have over 1 million citizens in the state of Israel who are loyal citizens, who are Muslim Arabs and Christian Arabs, and they're welcome to stay in our. When Israel's Declaration of Independence, look it up online. Israel's Declaration of Independence guaranteed full rights to anyone who wanted to be part of our state, and many people took us up on that. And we recently had a Supreme Court justice who was an Arab. I mean, so Arabs can have full rights in our country without a problem if they're willing to accept it as the Jewish state, as the state of Israel. If they want to destroy it, then they got to go.
Exactly.
It's like any country. If somebody wants to destroy the United States, they got no business being in the U.S. And that's the case in any country.
I couldn't have said that any better. And that's exactly right. If they don't want to obey by the laws of the land, look, you can go to Syria. They could go over to Saudi Arabia. Let them go over to Iraq, Iran.
I mean,
Libya.
now, Gaza is ruled entirely by Hamas. Israel has nothing to do with Gaza except for trying to keep the Gazans from invading our country.
Absolutely.
Yesterday, they called these protests and demonstrations. There was an incursion where they tried to literally storm into Israel and slaughter. And their goal, they said very straightforward. They openly said what their goal was, to come into Israel and march on Jerusalem and capture it. And the Israeli army repelled this invasion. It was literally an invasion force.
Wow.
And about nearly 60 people were killed. And the anti-Semitic blood libel media is presenting this as demonstrations. I mean, it's a demonstration like Pancho Villa in 1911 invading the southern United States, right?
Holy
that kind
cow.
of demonstration. It was an invasion force that Israel repelled, and calling it a demonstration is a modern-day blood libel. It's disgusting. Hey, I want to read you something from the book of Maccabees.
Yes.
This is 1 Maccabees chapter 15. You said about how the people today would be going and they'd be siding with the Philistines. So this is an event that took place in the year 134 BC with a man named Antiochus VII. Now, the story of Hanukkah famously was with Antiochus IV. This is another king, 3 kings later, Antiochus VII, the Seleucid ruler, and he's dealing with Judah the Maccabee's brother, whose name was Simon. And it says as follows. This is in verse 27 of chapter 15. This is on my website, by the way. I quote this in a study called War Without End. And it's on my website, nehemiaswall.com, and I go into more detail. King Antiochus VII broke all the agreements he formerly had made with Simon the Maccabee and became estranged from him, saying, quote, now this is King Antiochus writing to Simon, you hold control of Yaffo and Gezer and the citadel in Jerusalem, and they are cities of my kingdom. So literally 3 major cities in Israel today: Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Gezer, which today would be roughly something like Ashkelon in that area. King Antiochus is saying, those aren't yours, those are mine. You stole those from me. He says, you have devastated their territory, you have done great damage in the land, and you have taken possession of many places in my kingdom. Now then, hand over the cities that you have seized and the tribute money of the places that you have conquered outside the borders of Judea. So he's literally saying the same thing. This Antiochus VII in 134 BC is literally saying the same thing the United Nations says today. Jerusalem, that's outside the borders of Judea. You have no business there. Simon responds to him as follows. He says, we have neither taken foreign land nor seized foreign property, but only the inheritance of our ancestors, which at one time had been unjustly taken by our enemies. So literally, we're not even talking an analogy here. It's literally some of the same pieces of land that foreigners are saying is theirs and that we stole from them, that was being said to our ancestors 134 BC. Literally, the letter that Simon the Maccabee sent to Antiochus VII could be sent by Prime Minister Netanyahu to the United Nations today.
Same spirit.
The same evil spirit coming against us. We're dealing with this is spiritual warfare. No question about it in my mind.
Brother, that's what it is. Satan has sought from the beginning to destroy the Jewish people. That's been his goal. He's not going to win. But, folks, it is a spiritual battle right now. That leads into the next question. Palestine. There's never been a Palestinian king that I can recall. And people talk about the Palestinian people. Who are these people, actually? And is it not true that the very name Palestine was an attempt by one of the Greek or Roman tyrants at the time to try to subjugate the Jewish people and erase the Jewish history of Jerusalem? Did he not rename Jerusalem as Palestine? What have you found out about that in your research?
So this is something that imperialist powers have done for millennia. And what do I mean by imperialist powers? You go into somebody else's country and you conquer it. One of the first things you do is you strip the local population of their claim to that land by changing the names of the places. A famous example in modern history is the Polish city of Gdansk, which the Germans wanted to conquer. It was the precipitating event that led to World War II. Hitler said, give me Danzig. And the Poles said, no, Gdansk is a Polish city. You have no business in Danzig. And when they refused, Germany invaded Poland. That was the event that caused World War II. So in the year 132 AD, there was a Jewish revolt against the Roman occupation. And that revolt is known in history as the Bar Kokhba revolt. And after 3.5 years of a sovereign Jewish state, the Romans came and they reconquered once again Judea from the Jewish population. As part of this process, this was actually the third Jewish revolt. The first is the famous one, 66 to 74 AD. The second one isn't very well known. It's called the Diaspora Revolt in 115 and 117. The Bar Kokhba revolt was revolt number 3. And by that time, the Romans said, enough is enough. We don't want to have more Jewish revolts in the Jewish land. And they did 2 things. They wiped out every man, woman, and child. They murdered every man, woman, and child from over 1,000 Jewish villages in Judea. That was the first thing they did. The second thing they did is they brought foreign populations that they then settled in Judea, and renamed the land Palestina. Why Palestina? Because the people in the area had remembered that there had been a people on the coast called the Philistines. In Hebrew, that the Philistine territory was called Peleshet. And interestingly, you can't even make this stuff up.
Wow.
The meaning of the word Philistine, Plishtim, is from the word palash, which means invaders. So Philistines literally means invaders. And why were they called invaders? Until about 100 years ago, nobody really knew for sure. But when they deciphered the documents in Egypt, particularly the El Amarna documents, they found all these references to this group called the Sea Peoples. And the Sea Peoples were people from the Mediterranean who invaded the land of Israel and surrounding areas. And those people in Hebrew were called Plishtim, invaders. And so the Romans took that name, Plishtim, Philistines, invaders, and they slapped it on the name of Judea to strip the Jews of their identity, or to strip the land of Israel of its historic connection to the people of Israel. Before that, it was called Judea, even by the Romans, and going back, thousands of years, going back to the time of Joshua. So Palestina was the Roman name to strip Israel of its identity. We hear about these Palestinian refugees. The refugees were by and large Palestinians who fled Israel during Israel's War of Independence. And after that, they truly were refugees. According to international law, two things can happen with a refugee. Or three things. One is the refugee can be returned to the person's land of origin. If that's not possible, then the refugee has to either be settled in the country they arrived in or settled in a third country. That's the United Nations Charter on Refugees. There is no such thing, according to the United Nations Charter, as a second and third generation or fourth generation refugee. Right? After the fighting stops, after the shooting stops, the person needs to be returned to the land they came from, settled in the country they arrived in, or settled in the third country. And if it's in the second or third country, it has to be as a citizen. The U.S. is currently taking tens of thousands of refugees. In 2015, Europe absorbed over 1 million refugees. As soon as those people arrived in Europe, those Syrian refugees, they were on a track to citizenship.
It's crazy.
It's international law, and I have no problem with it. The United Nations International Charter on Refugees has a special dispensation for Palestinians. There is a special exception to the definition of refugee, which only applies to the Palestinians, and that special dispensation says that the Palestinians will remain, quote unquote, refugees in perpetuity. Their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren are treated as refugees, even though they're not fleeing from some country where there's a war.
Right.
They're people who were born in, think about this. You could be born in Lebanon. Your father was born in Lebanon. Your grandfather was born in Lebanon, and your great-grandfather fled from northern Israel. And you are considered a Palestinian. Now compare that to, I was recently in Mexico, and they were telling me, not all Mexicans are poor immigrants. There's people who are very wealthy. They get on a plane, and they fly to Dallas while pregnant, and they have a baby at the hospital in Fort Worth, so their baby will have U.S. citizenship. And afterwards, they get back on the plane and go back, and then their child has these options, which, hey, that's the U.S. law. If you don't like it, you could change U.S. law.
True.
But that, as I understand, it's perfectly legal under U.S. law, to the best of my knowledge. So that child who has spent maybe 3 days in the United States is a full U.S. citizen and may never step foot in the U.S. again. Compare that to a so-called Palestinian refugee who's a third or fourth generation in Lebanon. Why are they a refugee? Because the Arab world wants to use these people to destroy the Jewish state. There's no question about it. The Palestinian refugees are treated like dogs, particularly by the Syrians. They're treated, in fact, they treat dogs pretty bad. They're treated worse than cats by the Syrians. They throw barrel bombs into their neighborhoods and blow them up, literally blowing up civilians.
Wow.
Those people are as much Palestinian as I am Lithuanian. If I were to show up today in Lithuania and say, hey, my great-grandfather was born in Lithuania, or my great-great-grandfather was born in Lithuania, I want to be a Lithuanian citizen, they laugh at me. Well, wait a minute. My great-grandfather fled as a refugee from there. Why shouldn't I be a refugee 3-4 generations later having the right to return there, because it's not how it works under international law. The Palestinians are a special case for the sole purpose of destroying Israel. And this is just anti-Semitism. Let's call it what it is.
Yes.
The Jews are the indigenous population, the original population of the land of Israel since the time of Joshua, since 1400 BC. And the Palestinians are literally named after, they come from Arabia. They're called Arabs. They have no business in our land. If they're not willing to accept our country, then I think they got to go.
Agree.
So I
agree.
Yeah.
How is it that you can have missiles being fired at Israel every day? In fact, what was it, about 2 weeks ago, as President Trump said he's pulling out of that really bad Iran treaty? Good for President. We finally we're doing some things right for a change in our government.
Yeah.
Well, I heard that there were like 15 missiles or so shot off at Israel again, this time from Iran proxy forces over there across the border. And
what's going on there is a disaster.
If missiles were fired on any other country, if we were fired on in America, that would be a declaration of war. We wouldn't sit there and take that. And what country would? Yet Israel's supposed to keep absorbing these daily attacks and not respond. Is this nuts or what?
Look, this is a continuation of anti-Semitism that's been going on for 2,000 years. It's truly the same pattern. Jews would get slaughtered, and they'd say, well, you must have done something to provoke them. And then the way it's presented in the media is literally they say things. I heard this just the other day that 50 people were killed, and this happened yesterday, following earlier protests. No, it was an invasion of our country that we repelled. So, the Iran is a major danger to the entire Middle East. And look, they're a much bigger danger to Saudi Arabia. Iran could kill thousands of Jews in Israel, but they'll never topple the state of Israel. They could easily topple the regime in Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait. They've already toppled the regime in Yemen. That's already happened. It's not a prediction. It happened already. They've already backed this fascist, murderous regime in Syria. So Iran is a big danger. Hopefully the nations around us will realize this and do something about it. But Israel's going to defend ourselves. We will not go like lambs to the slaughter like our ancestors did not that long ago in the Holocaust. We won't.
Absolutely not. Definitely Iran's a big problem. I think they already have the nuclear weapons, okay? And they've had them for a long time. That's my opinion. Clearly they're saying death to Israel, death to America. That cannot be tolerated, as President Trump said. What's your prediction? Do you think that war with Iran is coming on a nuclear scale? Could it have even been prophesied? Let me throw in this question. The plains of Shinar, is that modern day Iran when it says Shinar or Shinar?
No, I believe that's Iraq to the best.
Oh, that's Iraq. What's your gut take on this? What's your prediction? Do you think we're going to go nuclear with Iran?
So certainly before there's a nuclear encounter with Iran, there'll be a ballistic encounter with Iran. And you don't need to be a prophet to know that there's going to be a ballistic war between Israel and Iran's proxy, Hezbollah, which is in southern Lebanon.
Yeah.
If Hezbollah were not now bogged down in its own war, which it's losing, against the Free Syrian Army and other forces in Syria, they would be attacking Israel. And they're busy now with their own problems, largely their own creation. So Hezbollah has more rockets trained at northern Israel than, I believe it's the statistic is more rockets trained at Israel than France and England have in their entire arsenals.
Wow.
And this is Hezbollah, which is not even an official army, right? It's a terrorist organization. More Americans have been killed by Hezbollah than I think any other organization besides Al-Qaeda. So Hezbollah is, and certainly they've carried out more terrorist attacks than I believe than any other
I heard they have
besides Al-Qaeda.
Like 150,000 missiles trained on Israel right now.
Yep.
How the heck?
So those are ballistic missiles that could be fired at any moment, right?
Wow.
So that'll cause a lot of damage. And, but will it destroy Israel? No, Israel will survive. It would be like somebody, blowing up all of New York, and we could have, 100,000 casualties. That could easily happen. I hope it doesn't happen. If it happens, Golda Meir famously said, we can forgive the Arabs for killing our boys. We can never forgive the Arabs for forcing our boys to kill their boys. And if they fire their missiles at us, it will be really bad. Let's put it that way. If they kill 100,000 Israelis, we're going to have to root them out of Lebanon. And a lot of people, a lot of innocent civilians will be killed in Lebanon. But, they may not leave us a choice. So I hope I hope and pray it doesn't happen.
Well, we definitely have a problem over there. Praying that our leaders have the wisdom to know how to defeat Iran and do it. We're live with Nehemia Gordon. I'm looking at the clock. There's so much more to talk about, and where's the time went? But I wanted to take some time to hit some of these points, folks, because it's very important that you and I understand that God means what he says. And God has a plan to bring the Jewish people back to the land of Israel. That's the land he gave them. Jerusalem is their eternal capital. That's a timepiece of, Bible prophecy, if you're a student of Bible prophecy. And you bless Israel, God's going to bless you. If you curse them, folks, I wouldn't give you 2 cents for your life. If you want to be one of those that divide up the land of Israel, that are on the side of, those that are protesting our embassy going back to Jerusalem, where it should have been the beginning, I wouldn't give you 2 cents for your life, because you're not going to come under the blessing of God. You're going to have the curse on you. Genesis 12:3 is still in effect today. God means what he says. Before we close, give out your website. Also,
NehemiasWall.com.
Spell that for us.
NehemiasWall.com. NehemiasWall.com. NehemiasWall.com.
If someone would like to support the research that's ongoing, is there a way they can give to this project?
Yeah, I have a ministry, McCore Hebrew Foundation. It's a 501c3 in the United States, and you could do that through NehemiasWall.com.
Wow, that's awesome. This is fantastic. Folks, if you want to learn more, go to Nehemia's Wall. You can help support this ongoing research. And I want to just say, did I tell you that I named my son with a name of importance? His name is Jeremiah.
That's a great name.
We were trying to figure
him up.
Amen. We were trying to figure a name, and I couldn't figure out what to name, but I wanted to choose a name of significance. And I thought, well, Yirmiyahu, that may be kind of hard to pronounce or spell. So we'll use the English version, but at first I passed on it. And I told my wife, Narita, I said, let's look for some other names. We were throwing names back and forth. And you know what? I said, God, what do you want us to call our boy that's coming? And I prayed about it, and that's another story. But God woke me up one day, and I had a couple things I needed some answers on. So I went to his word, and it fell right open to Jeremiah 1. And I said, wait a minute. And I read Jeremiah 1. It was part of a prophecy God had given me back in 2005, which had significance to me. Same word. My wife loved the name. I said, it's got the name of God embedded in it. Yahovah will raise up. I said, God's just given us the name for our baby, and I dedicate him to the Lord. I said, Lord, use him for your glory and honor in your service. So there we are. My brother, you have a special name. Nehemiah rebuilt the walls, didn't he?
He sure did.
Yes, he did. And I haven't told anybody yet, but we're praying that the Lord give us another child. And if he's a boy, I'm going to name him Nehemiah.
Wow. So now I'm in on your prayer too.
Yes. It's been an honor to be here with Nehemia Gordon. We're going to have him back on soon to talk about his current research on the name. But praise God for what you're doing, my friend. God richly bless you. And would you like to close us out in prayer today?
Yehovah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to live in this period or have access to so much information about you and your name. Yehovah, this prayer I pray when I study your word is that you open my eyes that I may see the wonderful hidden things of your word, of your Torah. Amen.
You have been listening to Hebrew Voices with Nehemia Gordon. Thank you for supporting Nehemia's McCore Hebrew Foundation. Learn more at NehemiasWall.com.